Greetings, U.S. history students. This video is on topic 1.4, which is the Columbian Exchange and the beginning of Spanish conquest in the Americas. In our last video, we talked about the factors that made it possible for European nations to begin exploring and to begin practicing maritime exploration. That was the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and new inventions and innovations. And then we also discussed the motives that they had, which would be the three G's: the desire for more wealth, gold; the desire to spread Christianity, God; and then glory, the desire to bring prestige to their newly created nation states and to be better than your rival nation states. So there's a level of competition there. One of the maritime explorers that emerged during this push for maritime exploration was Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was an Italian merchant, navigator, and maritime explorer who for about 8 years had been trying to convince the various nation states of Europe that he had a way to get a direct trade route with Asia. And he often refers to Asia as the Indies, the area of Asia today, the Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, so China. That would be the Indies for Christopher Columbus. And he believed that you could just sail west from Europe. So we have our map right here. You could just sail this direction across the Atlantic, which nobody had really done. Nobody had gone this far out yet. They didn't know what was out there. And eventually, if you just kept sailing, because the world was round, you would arrive in what he called the Indies: China, Southeast Asia, and so on. This seemed to make sense to him and to many people at this time, actually, because they had no idea that there was a North and South America. North America and South America had been developing and been isolated from Africa, Europe, and Asia, this area known as Afro-Eurasia, for millennia. These groups had not interacted. And so for a explorer like Columbus, he believed that you should sail west long enough and you'd arrive in the Indies. Why did he want to do this? Well, Europeans were constantly trying to find a direct trade route to the Indies or to Asia, Eastern Asia, because at the time, groups like the Ottoman Empire, located in this region here today, mostly the Middle East and Southeastern Europe, and other large empires in like Central Asia and in the Middle East, they were charging high taxes to travelers and to traders who would go through their lands. So as Europeans would travel across Asia to get to the Indies, they had to stop and pay taxes at these empires, these middlemen, is what they'd call them, these middlemen groups. And so they wanted to find a way to bypass or go around those middlemen. And this was Columbus's idea, was just to sail west. Eventually, after 8 years of trying to get people to buy into his theory, the newly formed Spanish nation, Spain, which had been several kingdoms that now emerged into one nation, agreed to give him 3 ships and agreed to support his journey for this to the Indies. So in 1492, a really important year, Columbus sailed the ocean blue with his 3 ships. And in October of 1492, he arrived in Hispaniola, or an island in the Bahamas, and he believed he had landed in the Indies. He believed that he wasn't actually in the Americas because he didn't know it existed. He thought he had landed in Indonesia. And so when he came across the indigenous people living here, he called them Indians because he thought he was in the Indies. Columbus gathered several resources. He enslaved a handful of these people, the Arawaks, and he brought them back to Europe. And he said, "Look, I have found a trade route, a direct trade route to the Indies." And everyone believed him at first. That he became extremely famous. Spain gained a lot of prestige. And Columbus then went on 3 more trips to the Americas to gather resources and to further solidify what he thought was a direct trade route to the Indies. After those 3 expeditions were done, it had become abundantly clear that Columbus had actually not discovered a direct trade route with Asia. He was not in the Indies, and that he was actually in a totally new world altogether, that he had stumbled across a landmass that nobody knew existed and had far more resources than they could have imagined and was way bigger than they thought, and a lot of mystery. And so this is actually an even bigger find than a direct trade route to Asia. And after Columbus, died, more European explorers began to travel to the Americas and began to interact with people living there and to conquer and colonize it. Now, what makes this, interaction between what was once known as the Old World, this is a Eurocentric point of view, but Europe Africa and Asia, countries or continents that had interacted with each other for a long, long time. That was the old world. Um, that they had only certain organisms and diseases and types of people and ideas that existed here that had never been exposed to the New World, which would be North and South America. It's called the New World because, from this Afro-Eurasia point of view, this is a new discovery, even though they're the same age. So this isolation, the fact that like you can only get certain types of food, and in this chart you can see the different foods and some of the diseases and some of the animals and plants that had only existed in North and South America. They had never been brought to the old world. A lot of the stuff finally gets put on boats and shipped back to Europe and then gets diffused across Europe, Africa, and Asia. And these products that are over here become common in the old world. And the same token, there was lots of things in the old world, animals, plants, diseases, and people and ideas that had only existed here that were then brought over and then diffused across North and South America. And so you have this epic transatlantic exchange of people, disease, food, and ideas. And we call this the Columbian Exchange. It's not because Columbus did all this exchanging, but it's the result of the journeys of Christopher Columbus kind of kickstarting this transatlantic interaction. So when you hear Columbian Exchange, you should think to yourself, that means organisms and ideas that had only existed in the New World were introduced to the Old World, and vice versa. Stuff from the Old World that had only existed there for millennia were brought to the New World. And there were lots of positive things here, but there's also lots of negative things that are introduced between the different regions of the globe. So, for example, the contact between these groups and the Columbian Exchange led to Europeans learning about a whole bunch of new types of plants and things like maize, different types of beans, corn, sweet potatoes, and standard potatoes. Those crops had never existed in the old world. And now they're being brought from the Americas over here and they begin to spread, and they have a huge effect on European population. It gives more diversity and more nutrition to the European diet, and ultimately leads to a population increase because people are living longer because they have all these great, wonderful, healthy new foods that are brought over and that people can grow and survive on. They're also going to experience things like tobacco. Tobacco is something that did not exist in Afro-Eurasia, and tobacco will be brought over and become a very lucrative cash crop. So a whole new industry will emerge there. They also got some bad things from the Americas. One example of this would be disease. The disease syphilis, that awful STD, had never existed in Africa, Europe, and Asia until some European explorers came over and they contracted the disease. You can use your imagination. And they went back home and they then spread the disease. Again, you can use your imagination. So syphilis was an old or a new world disease that got brought to the old world. On the flip side, there was a lot that went from the old world over here to the new world. So an example of this would be like Europeans introduced to the Americas sugar, so sugar cane, different types of grass like bluegrass, all kinds of animals, pigs, cows, cattle, horses. And they also brought over new ideas that had existed in Africa, Europe, and Asia, such as the wheel, how to produce iron metallurgy, and things like guns and gunpowder. Those ideas all diffused over as well. Without a doubt, the most consequential introduction from the Columbian Exchange was disease, and smallpox had only existed in the old world, Afro-Eurasia, and people living in Afro-Eurasia had developed some immunity to this disease. But unfortunately, when Europeans came over, they brought the disease with them accidentally, and nobody in the Americas had any kind of immunity to it because they had never been exposed to it. And the disease smallpox and other European diseases will have a traumatic effect on Native American populations. Some estimates claim that because of diseases like smallpox, something like 90% of the Native American population will be wiped out. So indigenous people in the Americas will be wiped out by smallpox and other old world diseases. So you have positive things from these interactions. You also have some negative things. One more example of like a positive interaction would be the introduction of horses to the New World. Europeans, Africans, and Asians had horses in their societies for a long time. But prior to 1492, horses did not exist. And so when horses are brought by Europeans to the Americas, they begin to populate and reproduce, and they diffuse across the continents. As a result, Native Americans, especially in the Great Plains, began to interact with horses as well, and they were able to use horses to more effectively hunt bison and live a nomadic lifestyle. So that'd be an example of a positive interaction of the Columbian Exchange for Native Americans. They're receiving a new organism that changed their life in a positive way. Unlike disease, this picture shows Aztec citizens spreading smallpox and then dying. And this graph shows the dramatic decline in Native American population because of smallpox, 7 million in 1500, dropping down to to about 1 million in 1750. So you have a huge decrease. That would be a negative result of the Columbian Exchange. Something you should ask yourself is if you had to compare the two worlds, the old world, Afro-Eurasia, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and the new world, North and South America, which region benefited the most from the Columbian Exchange? Like they both clearly got good and bad things, but did one region get more good things and less bad things than the other? And then why or why not? That is a good question to have an argument for. All right. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Have a great day.